Good evening, everyone. Wow, so many of you have joined tonight. We are always grateful when you spare a few moments to hang out with us. But I have to say, whether it's 6 p.m., 7, 8, or even 9 p.m. where you are, these evening hours are sacred, and we so appreciate you spending one of them with us. That's right. Tonight's webinar is a full-length variety, 1 hour. Lately, we've taken to these mini-webbies, short bites of information you can consume in 30 minutes or less. But ringworm is such a hot and itchy topic. It's one of the most popular inquiries we receive. We want to take the time to really dive in and give you all the information you need to combat this non-existent worm. Before we start, I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that you are welcome to submit questions anytime during the presentation. We'll queue them up and open the forum for Q&A after. If there are more questions than we can get to tonight, fear not. Maddie's Pet Forum is hosting an after show, and you can head over there anytime and continue fighting the good fight on fungus. You'll find the links you need to join that conversation in the green resource widget at the bottom of your screen. Okay, we all know that fungus is anything but fun, but the good news is it absolutely can be controlled without the use of euthanasia. Here to talk to us about how to fight the fungus among us is Laura Mullen, Shelter Outreach Programs Manager at the San Francisco SPCA. I'm proud to say Laura and I worked together when she first received her small grant to start the SPORE Program back in 2012, and none of us had a single doubt she'd do big things with that small investment. I can't say anyone would have known that with the generous help of Maddie's Fund, she'd go on to host more than 42 shelters from 19 different states at the SFSPCA, training them how to treat ringworm and how to eliminate fear. Laura, you're a ringworm warrior in my eyes. Thank you for being here with us today.
Okay, great. Hello, and thank you, Mandy, for your introduction and for inviting me to do this. And thank you all for tuning into this, even if it's really late out on the West Coast, and learning about this fungus among us. Ringworm can lead to devastating consequences when found in an animal shelter. Many shelter workers are faced with difficult decisions when it comes to ringworm management in the shelter setting. Kittens, which are our most adopted population, is the most affected by this disease. With the use of clear protocols, a little hard work, a few extra hands, and a plan, the stubborn fungal offender can be conquered and eradicated from the animal and the shelter environment. Just look at Sweet Harvey's little face. He might have started off on a rough road, ending up in a shelter with ringworm. But there was a plan for him. His source shelter was unable to treat him fully, but they were able to save him by correctly isolating him and reaching out and finding placement for him at the San Francisco SPCA in our ringworm treatment program. I'm sure most of you in shelter or rescue work have encountered a donation like this. 4 kittens come into the shelter in a box. You open the box, finding that one kitten has some apparent hair loss on his front paws and nose. At this time, the other 3 kittens appear healthy with no signs of hair loss. So what is the plan for all them? Are they all infected? Are they even litter mates? Or did some good Samaritan just pluck these 4 kittens from 4 different yards? We are always unsure of their true history. So we are unsure of their true history, so we must rely on a few tools to help us determine how affected they are, or even if they are at all affected with this disease. For animals entering our shelter system, we start off by getting as much of a history as we can get. But many of us in shelter work know how challenging that can be, and most times we are working with no known history. Looks like I need to speak up. Let me try to get my microphone up working a little higher for you guys so that you can hear me a little better, because I'm getting a few notes that you need to hear a little bit better. So I hope that is a little bit better on your end. So getting back to how are we looking at these animals that come into our shelter system? So yes, we start off by getting as much of a history as we can. But many of us in shelter work know how challenging this must be. And sometimes we are working with no known history, and we really have to rely on our full examination. You want to take the time checking for hair loss and breaks of the hair, paying attention paying lots of good attention to our common areas around the face and paws. However, I have seen ringworm in all places on an animal, under the tail, in between toes, in armpits, you name it, I've seen it. So be sure to look everywhere. So what about our 4 kittens that came in the box? After examining these guys in the white light and noticing some hair loss on their nose and feet of the tabby, it's time to turn off the lights and turn on the woods lamp. I want to do one of these little pulse checks with you. So I'd like to know how many of you routinely use a woods lamp as a tool for ringworm diagnostics. I want you to do a thumbs up for yes and a thumbs down for no. And you won't be able to see these answers, but I will give you an update as long as you sort of give me a pulse. Are you guys using woods lamps out there while you're trying to determine if an animal has ringworm? And we'll kind of come back to that answer. We're going to look up a little bit more about our use of the woods lamp. The woods lamp is a fantastic tool that helps detect most common ringworm infections, especially the most common ringworm infection of Microsporum canis. There are 3 main strains of ringworm that you see in shelter animals. You see Microsporum canis, Microsporum gypsum, and Trichophyton, metagrophytes. And about 98 to 99% of our population that's in the San Francisco SPCA ringworm program and most shelters consist of M. canis infections. With that being said, anecdotally, I've never seen an M. canis infection that has not fluoresced under the woods lamp. And what I see from your answers in the pulse check is that about 71% of you are using woods lamps as a routine tool, diagnostics. So that's fantastic. I know a few of you maybe have to chime in and give me some answers, but about 72% of you are starting to use a woods lamp, which is a great tool to use. And I'm really excited that some of you are using that already. The woods lamp does not necessarily need to get warmed up. Here's a few tips and tools for your woods lamp. It does not necessarily need to get warmed up, but our eyes need to warm up. We need to get adjusted to the darkness before the exam begins. You want to search the hair coat thoroughly with the woods lamp, going cross-grain against the hair if needed. Lots of times these animals will have hidden hairs that will be underneath the top layer of hairs, and sometimes you will see only a single fluorescence, like one of the pictures that are on the slides, just a single hair sometimes along the spine. And you want to make sure that you are really looking at these animals so that you can find where these lesions are. Now, when you start glowing kittens and cats, you'll see a lot of things that will glow because they're literally rolling in all sorts of things. So you want to be paying attention for that bright sort of apple green hair. And really, it has to be adhered to the hair. You cannot wipe it off. So lots of times I take a wet paper towel with my examination of the kittens, and I wipe off some debris that might be fluorescing some color. If I can wipe it off, it's not ringworm. Because if we could wipe away ringworm, we wouldn't be here at 9 o'clock at night learning about ringworm. So let's take a look at a few examples of some animals that have come through our shelter. When you look at this cat in the white light, you might be able to see, okay, after a little bit, maybe over that left eye is a little bit of hair loss there. Once we change, then we'll see, oh, wow, look at that. The woods lamp totally brings up that coloration. Now, it's a little hard to get the picture in the dark, but we did the best we could, and the cat was really great about it. So then we turn and we look at its sister that it came in with, and this is why it's really good to get a little bit of a history. Because when we first look at this cat, we could say, you know what, I don't see much on this cat, but actually it has 3 ringworm lesions. So when you're looking at it, you can actually see a little bit in front of that right ear and a little bit in front of that one. But if you went back to that cat and you looked at how they looked at on the exam, you may not have seen it. So let's go back. So now that we have a little bit of better understanding of how we utilize our woods lamp, let's go back and examine our box of our 4 kittens. No surprise that the tabby on the right had a woods positive lesion on his paw and nose. Plus, we found a new one developing on his tail. Because the way that ringworm lesions work is those spores from other lesions adhere to hairs. And they adhere to that hair for about 7 to 10 days, and they chew through that outer keratin layer and then start an infection. But what's really important is that they have 7 to 10 days where they're on the hair before an infection has started. So that's one thing we want to keep in mind when we're utilizing our ringworm, our tool of the woods lamp, and how to really examine what we're going to be using with it. So when we look at our kittens, then we start examining the other kittens. We look at the other 3 kittens and we realize, I'm not really seeing much on these other 3 kittens. There are no lesions found, only on the kitten on the far right. So what do we do? Now what? What are their next steps in the shelter? If we kept all of these kittens together, yeah, they probably would all 4 have ringworm. But nobody in any shelter wants more kittens with ringworm than is needed. So we need to develop some tools and start some cultures and realize some other things to determine whether they are just exposed or if they have a true infection. We really need to know what's going on with their skin. So after our initial woods lamp examination, we need to develop a plan. How are we going to determine what's going on with these kittens? How do we know how to move these kittens through the shelter system? So by utilizing great minds like Dr. Moriello, Dr. Newberry, and Dr. Hurley, and using those minds of those researchers that have come up with a lot of great ways to culture animals and to come up with systematic ways, we have applied their research to our shelter setting. So systematically gathering samples for our in-house cultures help determine how much, if any, ringworm is found actually on the kittens. Many of us originally were taught to pluck hairs surrounding the lesion, but when you think about how ringworm infections grow, so that spore lands on the hair, takes 7 to 10 days to chew through that outer keratin layer, dives on the inside of that hair shaft, starts creating an infection that actually starts coating the hair. And that coating of the hair is what we see when we're using our woods lamp. And that coating of the hair actually digests the hair shaft and creates our bald lesion. And then there's nothing there. So when we are told to pluck around the lesion, we actually are grabbing some hairs that are not infected, and we're not getting a good sample size of really what's going on with those kittens. And then when we go back to our 3 kittens in the box, what are we going to do with those kittens with no lesions? How do we sample them? We definitely need another plan. So we want to start a fungal culture, and so we do all of our fungal cultures in-house, and we utilize them for sort of gauging our treatment program. Now let's do another pulse check. How many of you out there are currently using DTMs or any sort of cultures to determine your ringworm diagnostics? So let's do a thumbs up for people who are utilizing cultures and a thumbs down for people who aren't. And there's no judgment in that. I just want to sort of get a poll of how it's going and how people are utilizing or how they are diagnosing ringworm at this time. And so by using these fungal cultures that we do, and I will get the answers as soon as people are starting to plug in, because there's just we have a few more answers that I want to get in before I relay the results. But I do want you to note that these sort of samples are getting us a really good snapshot of what is going on with these animals. And it looks like about 50%, 55% of you are utilizing cultures. But it's not necessarily, it's also understanding how to use the cultures and how to get the accurate sample. So what we have applied here is the McKenzie technique. We use a sterile toothbrush and we brush the kittens for a determined amount. They get 20 lesional strokes, or 20 strokes on their whole body. And then they get 20 strokes total. If they have a lesion, like our little tabby kitten, we do 15 non-lesional strokes, and then we do 5 strokes on the lesions of the kitten, so that we know, okay, these are the ones that our woods lamp were a little bit suspicious about, and we're going to follow up with these. They're our most concerned. If it's those other kittens, we just go ahead and we brush 20 strokes on them. We want the same systematic way of gathering our samples so that we can inoculate our fungal culture in the same way. So if we have a standard way of collection and a standard way of inoculation, then we have a standard way of interpreting our results. And again, we have applied all of this from research-based methods that have proven to us how to really score pathogenically of these cultures and how how to take those results and move our animals through the system. So you want to develop a consistent pattern that you're able to do, and that if you are able to use volunteers, that they are able to do. A very quick and easy way to incorporate people and be able to have a systematic way of doing things. Because ultimately, we want to know how to read that. So one of those kittens that's just sitting next to a new kitten may have a spore or two on him because he just made friends with him on the box on the way over to the shelter. But he may not have a significant infection. But we did take a toothbrush and we brushed that whole kitten. And so we need to know how to interpret these results. You may have a pathogen score where I have only one colony on a plate. And then a true infection is the third, P3, and that is usually up to about 200 to 300 colonies on the plate. So when I know, and I've brushed the kitten the same way, and I've gotten one colony versus 200 colonies, and everything is done in the exact same way, I now have a guide that shows me what I need to do with these animals. And so the guide really helps us, and this again is taken from research and applied to shelters. So the P1 scores are cats that are examined again with a woods lamp, because again, these cultures have to take about a week to grow. And so during that week, the animals will be remaining in isolation or quarantine, and they will have been kept up on either a woods or a lime sulfur dip and any sort of medication that is needed with them. But if after a week they have a P1 score and they're still woods lamp negative on their second exam, that animal gets one sporicidal dip and moved on its system. And we don't necessarily need more kittens than are needed. The P2 scores take a little bit more of examination and to make sure that they are truly negative. And the P3 scores, we know they're positive, and we make sure that their treatment has begun. So then we look at our kittens, and we say, well, where are they? How did they do? And when we look at these guys, we see that, well, I don't know if my animations are coming up. That's weird. I don't know. Oh, here, I got my animations up. So as we see, in a week later, these kittens got all these culture plates. They're all different. So then what do we learn from that? How can we take our sort of actions, our cultures, and interpret them and move these kittens through the system so we do not have to treat more animals than are truly infected? So we look at our kitten all the way on the right, and we see he's got a very positive culture plate. And his friend next to him thought he was cool and kind of went on it and, sat next to him on the box on the way to the shelter. And so he got a few spores on him. And we took our toothbrush and we covered his entire body. But he only grew 3 colonies, unlike his friend, who is his new friend, who grew about 200 colonies. And the 2 other kittens were like, I am not going to be playing with you. I'm going to stay on this side of the box. And they got nothing. But what I do know is that I cultured each one of these animals the exact same way, and I know that I can now interpret their cultures in a standard way. And I know this because we have done a lot of research and we have done a lot of practicing of it, and we know that we can interpret safely and move these animals on if they are not truly infected. And a lot of times we do this also by reading and interpreting our DTMs in-house. By keeping our cultures in-house, we are able to see a little bit earlier that the animals are infected. The culture on the left side of your screen is the same as the culture on the right side of your screen. It's just taken one at 5 days and one at 7 days. And you can see, if you can kind of zoom into that one on the 5 days MKNIS, you can see the starts of colonies beginning. Now, I couldn't do any sort of microscopic identification and know that that's MKNIS and that animal needs to be treated, but because I've always grown them in-house, and I've seen them grow, I know that that day 5 is going to be that day 7, and on day 10, I will get a positive macroconidia. But that does not mean I cannot start treatment on day 3 or day 5 when I start to see the growth. So keeping cultures in-house, learning how to get people to read them is going to be so important by finding out what's going on with the animal as quickly as possible so that you can start treatment. It's also good to note that each sort of species grows a little bit different. MKNIS will be sort of nice and fluffy, and it has a nice apparent sort of fluffiness about it, and on the microscopic identification, it sort of looks different. So I've made a poster that actually has all 3 species and what they look like on the culture plate, and then how they are different on the microscopic identification. Because if you're growing them in-house, you need to see what's going on. What are we growing? And is there any sort of different treatment that's needed? Is there anything I need to do for this animal? And so you want to make sure that you're growing in-house so that you're able to get your answers as quickly as possible. So now when you do say, oh, okay, I guess now they have some ringworm. I guess we need to treat it. Well, ringworm treatment takes 3 concurrent therapies, and they have to be done together or you will not be successful. They need an oral medication. You need to treat it from the inside out. They need a topical medication, especially for shelters, to help keep the environmental control and to help keep seeds of new infection from infecting them or other animals. And you have to clean where they're sitting. You can't just treat the animal without treating its cage and treating the room that's around there. Keeping things decluttered with appropriate disinfectants and utilizing all this stuff so that you can if you do those 3 things at the same time, you will cure it a lot faster than just doing 1 or 2. And then, oh, I got to do this, I got to do this. You will save much time if you just do all 3 things at once. But that does take a control, which it's sort of nice in shelter systems that you do have a little control of the room. I have control of what I tell my staff to do. I have control of how we're doing things. When you're working with private home environments, lots of times you don't have as much control, but you try to instill as much of the concurrent therapies in order for it to be successful. So lime sulfur. A lot of you guys might use lime sulfur. I love lime sulfur. Lime sulfur is a fantastic product. Yes, it's stinky, but it smells like victory. It smells like lives being saved. You know, this is a product that really helps a lot of environmental containment for shelters. What this really does for a lot of it is it helps keep the room really spore-free. Lime sulfur is a fantastic product, and it coats the hair, and it actually coats the lesions and prevents the lesions from releasing spores for 2 to 3 days, which is why we dip twice a week, really to keep the spore count down in the room. I want to be able to have my veterinarians come in and look at a ringworm kitten who may not be feeling well first thing in the morning, and then know that they can also go to the adoption center right after that to look at another animal, and they are not bringing anything with them. Yes, we use a lot of PPE and that sort of thing, but I also know that by using lime sulfur, the spore count in my room is almost minimal. And we have done environmental cultures on our dirtiest day, which is the morning of our deep clean, and we have gotten negative cultures from our communal space within the ringworm wards, not in where the animals are living, but in the space outside of the animals' cages, but in the wards, which is fantastic because it really helps relay the message that we can treat it in there and we are not going to get it exposed to the rest of our shelter. When I first started this ringworm program, we treated about 50 to 75 a year. And in those same exact spaces, which are 15 kennels that I have, we now treat 325 to 350 cats a year. And we can only do that, and we've done that, and we have never seen it surge out into our non-contagious population because we really keep it in our back positive wards, and we keep up our lime sulfur, and we try to keep it in the back, and it has not, even though we have quadrupled the size of our program, we have not seen it affect our adoption program or any of our adoptable animals. One thing you do want to use for lime sulfur, you want to use an 8 ounce per gallon dilution, which is about a 1 to 20. You dilute it with some nice warm water, and that always makes them feel a little bit better. You don't want to physically dip the animals because really, who wants to be that 50th cat dipped in the bucket? That's just kind of gross. So we use actually a pump sprayer, and you'll see one of these volunteers in the bottom right-hand corner using one of our pump sprayers. You'll also see that there's a tiny little sponge in the bottom right-hand corner of that picture, and that we saturate those sponges with lime sulfur to do around their face and in their ears. So we spray them from the neck down, and we just use a surface like any other table or anything. The cats just hang on a towel, and we just sort of spray them and paint the kitties. And they really grow up with us knowing that. Actually, the kitten on the left was purring and making muffins as we were bathing that cat because she came in at about 5 weeks of age, and she's grown up with just what they do here. They just dip us all the time. And so we just sort of keep dipping them, and so we apply it to the dry coat, do their face and ears. Now, they don't have to be drip drying, but it does have to saturate their coat, and it does have to dry on their hair. So we give them a quick little squeeze dry so that our kittens are not dripping, but they are still wet, and then we put them back in their cage with a little bit of heat support. We use a heat lamp here, but I have a lot of shelters that do not have heat lamps or heat in their areas where they treat the ringworm. So they put their kittens or cats back in a kennel with a little sock where they have rice in it, where they've sort of heated up that sock to make it a little bit nice and warm. When they're in the kennel, they can spot clean their room and do some other things. So lime sulfur is a fantastic product, but you want to be doing it. Most people just don't want to do it because it's a little smelly, but harness that smell. Be powerful with that smell. That smell means lives are being saved. Tell your public that's why this place smells. I worked with one shelter where they dipped the animals, even though it was behind the scenes, it was really near the opening of the shelter, and people would come into the shelter and it would smell like lime sulfur. They didn't know it was happening, so they turned around and left. But what I did for that shelter is we made posters. We said, yes, you smell that? I do too. Smells like lives being saved. Smells like we are doing things for this population. We had some beautiful, adorable kittens full of yellow dip and pictures, and people started seeing those posters, and they're like, oh, that's what the smell is. Like, own it, love it, and your people will understand it. I don't even smell it anymore. And a lot of people I work with and most of my volunteers, they love it because they're like, oh, yeah, nobody sits next to me on the bus on the way home. It's fantastic. And so use it for however you want to use it, but do use some sort of topical therapy. Lime sulfur is the best one for in-shelter use. There are other ones, and I'll talk about when I'm talking about the foster program, another sort of dip that can be used in a smaller setting. The peroxy wash can be used in sort of a smaller foster home setting, which is different than our larger shelter setting. So getting down to, okay, the SPCA, everybody always wants to know, what's your treatment protocol? And this, quick and dirty is my treatment protocol. It's nothing that I've made up. It's something that I've taken from research and have applied to our shelter and have figured out that it works. And it doesn't necessarily, you can have this sort of written there, but then it's like, how do you actually carry out the treatment protocol? It's one thing of what to do, and then it's how to do it. So our what to do is we treat with itraconazole at 5 mg/kg for 21 days only. Most of our animals are in isolation for over 21 days, but research has shown us that that itraconazole builds up in their fat layer. And 2 months after their 21st dose, they are still at therapeutic levels for resisting ringworm. But, however, our animals need some fat on them. So when the study first came out, I got all excited and I started just applying, okay, everybody's just 21 consecutive days. It didn't really work for my population because a lot of them were kittens and they don't have as much fat. And so what we went back to doing is doing a pulse therapy where the kittens still get 21 days of itraconazole, but it's over a 5-week period. So they get a week 1, week 3, and week 5. They get reweighed at the beginning of that week so that we up their dosage because they're growing kittens. They are kept in isolation until they have 2 negative cultures. They receive twice weekly lime sulfur dips while in isolation. And every week we culture them and we determine their sort of response to treatment. And each week, hopefully, so we culture everybody on the weekends. And so each week on Saturday morning, I look at the cultures from the previous week, and hopefully we will have somebody who's been in therapy for about 5 or 6 weeks and now has a negative culture. Hooray, hurrah. That one gets to go to a first negative room. And then the first negative animals still stay in isolation with all the other animals that are almost out of there. They get another culture upon entry, and then they get to sit there another week. And then hopefully at the end of that week, they have a culture that's negative for 14 days and one that's negative for 7 days. And then, of course, one more dip, and then they get to graduate. We also do a deep cleaning of our isolation wards. Every weekend when we do culture our animals, all of our animals come out of the wards so that we can scrub their wards and make sure that they are being cultured and dipped and then returned to a spore-free environment. So you must think, how are we able to do a lot of this? Well, back in 2012, I did start a program called the SPORE Program, which stands for Shelters Preventing Outbreaks of Ringworm Through Education. Because we had a lot of shelters in the area that were culling entire rooms with one animal that was affected with ringworm. And they didn't want to keep doing this, but they didn't know really where to begin. And so I got a small grant from our board of directors, just go out to some shelters in our area to just talk to them, to just speak with them and give them some education on ringworm, but better ways of detection and treatment so that they can catch it before an outbreak really starts. And it sort of started a big sort of movement in our area to really prevent ringworm euthanasia deaths. And we have gotten on board, and most of our shelters in our area are doing fantastic with us. And in the last 5 years, we have not seen any euthanasias in our area solely for ringworm, which has been fantastic. Again, you may think, how can we do all of this? Well, a lot of it has to do with volunteer engagement. So we are about 70 to 80% volunteer driven for our program. And so these guys help us with everything because it used to be mainly staff driven, and I kept bringing in more and more animals, and they kept being like, oh, great, you're bringing more ringworm animals. And I'm like, yes, we're saving lives, we're having so much fun, it's going to be fantastic. But, you know, it really was hard work for them, and they had 10,000 other things that they were doing. And then I got one of the volunteers came up to me in the hall and was like, hey, do you need help dipping cats? And I kind of laughed at her and just said, really? You need help dipping cats? And so she sort of taught me that if I ask volunteers what I need, I'm probably going to find a lot of volunteers that will help me with what I need to do. So now all of my volunteers do all of my culturing. They do all of my dipping. I interpret the cultures, and they have to have a standard way that I can teach them that's easy, that's non-invasive, no plucking, just toothbrushing. They can do that, and they have fun, and they love lime sulfur dipping the cats because the cats are pretty used to it, and it's bright yellow, and it looks really cute, especially on the white cats, and they just get to have fun. And they come in for 2 to 3 hours and then leave. So they don't have the 10,000 other things that our shelter workers and that my coworkers are doing. So they really help us so much, and I would never have known how much they would be willing to do until I started asking them. And they are willing to do so much. They can scrub things. They can do every aspect of this. My volunteers are fantastic with wood lamps, and it was hard at first, but you know what? The cultures sort of double-check a lot of their work, so even if they weren't that great with their wood lamp exams, by the next few weeks they were, because we had 40 animals to examine, and if you're not good at the start, you're good at the end of the day after you've done 40 animals. So my volunteers are fantastic, and I could never have done as much as we can do without them. But it takes a lot of manpower to actually get them on board, and you know, volunteers are volunteers, so that's always a sort of something that is always a little bit hard to keep on the engagement. But we could never have run this program if we didn't get more manpower. You're never going to get paid manpower in shelter staff for ringworm. You really have to tap your volunteers, and don't be afraid to ask, because they will do it if they just have some instruction, and they take such pride in doing it, and they really love it. And you know, and a lot of them have gone off to go back to vet school and go and enjoyed a lot of great medical fields because they had a positive experience with our shelter workers running our ringworm program. So it's amazing how much you can get shelters to get volunteers to do. You just need to start asking them and training them. A little bit about our SPORE program. Yes, as Mandy said, we have now hit 42 shelters in 19 states that have received training from the SPORE program, and that's mainly because of the Maddie's Fun program, apprenticeship program, which I have been doing for the last 2 years. I got my 3rd grant this year, and this year I'm teaching 24 shelters, so that's going to be up to 66 shelters, and I don't know how many states, but by the end of the year we should be reaching more and more. And what I really want to start creating are little pockets of areas where people have information. And so if somebody calls me up in Massachusetts, I can say, yes, I know this person that took my training who's located here, and they can help you. And so it's creating sort of a spores of education, if you want to say, sort of getting it into the environment. And then the people who have come and taken my weekend workshops, they are all people who are involved in their community so that they can really get inspired and they can start being more impactful in their own community. So that's a little bit about the SPORE program and running shelters, running ringworm in a shelter program. But what I was really originally asked to do is talk about foster programs. And so when Mandy reached out to me, of course I used to work in the foster department. Many people who have been here in shelters for a lot of years know that you have a lot of different roles. So I used to be in the foster department before taking full time in a sort of program management department. But we started this thing called Finishing School Foster Program. And so our animals are under ringworm treatment for, on average, for about 6 to 8 weeks. With their finishing of treatment, their last 2 weeks, they're technically negative. We just have to cross our T's, dot our I's, and make sure that these animals are truly non-contagious before entering our population. And so what I thought is, well, what if after about 4 to 5 weeks of our initial treatment in the shelter, that these animals got to go out for the last 2 to 3 weeks and just enjoy a home. It's a low-stress environment. They actually are very less infectious at that point because they're usually culturing negative. And these kittens would stay under treatment. The foster parents are taught how to dip. They're taught how to give oral medication if needed. And they're taught how to get the cultures because they're really easy. You just brush the cats and you put it on the culture plate, and then they bring me the culture, and their animals can come back from their foster department or from their foster home when they've had 2 negative cultures. I also know that that foster home is not really contaminated if I'm getting negative cultures coming out of that foster home. So I know that the foster home is being cleaned, and most of my foster parents are really anal cleaning people, which is why I like them for my program, is that they really take it seriously, and they are very adamant about these are animals that they are saving. And so what I've sort of set up is very much the same similar thing, and this is comes from a slide that I use for teaching to my foster parents, is really all they need to really do is they need to feel comfortable with what they're getting themselves into. They need to be able to communicate. They need to keep their resident animals away, and that sort of goes without saying. But knock on wood, I have never had anybody who's taken home a ringworm foster spread it to their animals, resident animals or children, or have it get out of their foster room. So if they follow our instructions, they're able to house these animals. Also, most of the time, these animals are just negative in their home. It's just we're waiting for them to be negative. So really keeping these animals in this safe environment also is helping them be low stress, and they're healing a little bit faster. We also teach our foster parents the same exact way of how to culture our animals. We go over the first one in the room, we do it together, and then they just drop off cultures. And I know that their homes are pretty clear if I'm getting a negative culture from their home. And they really want these animals to be clear, so they are being very accurate on how they are doing these patterns. And if I start seeing, oh, there's more growth, or start seeing something else, it's a good indication that I need to check in with that foster parent and see how that animal's doing, maybe bring it in for an exam. But for the most part, they're able to stay out of the shelter and just heal using those last little bits to kind of heal on. The sort of treatment is the same sort of thing in the isolation, is they want to be able to dip the animals, apply with a sprayer, use a sponge on the face, squeeze dry, provide heat support, and be able to clean the environment. Now I did put more of the different products that we use more in our foster home. I do have some foster homes that really like lime sulfur. They're more what we call old school foster homes, and they like the smell. They like bleach, and they like lime sulfur, and they like the smell of it getting done. But my newer foster homes, the peroxy wash is a great product. Not as good for shelters for really a lot of cases in one room, but it's a fantastic use for a foster home that has 2 cats that are finishing up treatment to do. Because what's nice about this peroxy wash shampoo is it doesn't smell and it doesn't stain, and your foster parents will do it. And so you really need compliance that the animals are really getting bathed. And for the most part, these animals are at the tail end of treatment, and they just need to finish up their school, their ringworm school. They just need to finish that up so that they can come back to the shelter, go straight to spay-neuter from foster, and off to the adoption center and have it streamlined and going there. This is an example of one of my foster homes. And I had her take some pictures of her space. The best thing about it is that when she was out on a vacation somewhere, her husband took out the tub in the bathroom, which is what you can see in the sort of bottom right-hand corner, and he took out the tub so that the kittens would have more places to run. And so she came back from an appointment, and he had done all this for her, which was amazing. This is their foster bathroom. And what you'll see is that it's a simple bathroom. There's not much that she has to have in it, so it's easily cleaned. But she has things out of the reach. She has a high shelf, which you can actually see in that far right picture. You can see on top the pump sprayer for her baths, the carrier that her cats are in, and actually our treatment sheet on her counter for when her animals needed some oral treatment. And her room has very minimal stuff in it so that it's easily cleanable. Swiffers are great products to use in foster homes and shelter use because it really attracts dust and hair. So spores are not airborne. They adhere to things like dust and hair, and so we call them more hairborne, is that so by getting all that sort of dust and hair and everything that's in the environment out without swooping it around with a broom, is the Swiffer products really adhere to them so that the spores, dust, and hair really stay into the product and aren't being pushed around in the room. And so daily cleaning with Swiffers and weekly cleaning of a nice deep clean that's why you want to keep your foster space small and simple. I mean, people might be like, oh, there's not enough room to run around. It's so much better than the cage in the shelter. And these guys have a lot of fun. And when they do become first negative, lots of times the foster parents expand their space a little bit more. But they're really good if they are infectious to keep them in their foster space so it does not get out in their house or go. All of my foster parents have resident animals, and thankfully nobody has been affected. And really, the most of all is to have fun with these kittens. These kittens do not know that they have ringworm. It's not itchy for them. They know nothing except for that they just are a little chilly sometimes because they may not have as much hair, and that they get bathed all the time. But aside from that, they really just want to have fun, and they just want to relax and run around and be cute kittens. And all of these guys would have been euthanized at different shelters, but all of these guys found placement for their ringworm treatment because we had a little bit more time, we had a little bit more energy, and we had some foster support that got them out of the shelter to make more room in the shelter for more animals to be treated. And finally, this is the face I get when I tell people that I work in ringworm. And I get this face all the time, and I call it the face. And the face is really just a fear. And it's a fear of ringworm. It's a fear of that one summer that we all had that was terrible, but may not have been managed correctly. But we just have this fear. And we really need to go from that old lady on the left to the old lady on the right who's like, come on, bring it on. We can do this. Because we can change a lot of our attitude of ringworm just through education and discussion. And really, there's no way an animal can die of ringworm unless they end up in an animal shelter. And that needs to be stopped. But I understand that a lot of municipal shelters do not have the time and the space to really do a lot of this ringworm treatment. So it's up to rescues and transfer-in shelters to really bulk up on their protocol so that they can feel comfortable to take that ringworm-positive cat from the city shelter and bring it into their shelter where they have more time and they have more space and they have a program set up. And helping those municipal shelters set up isolation spaces, detection skills so that they can see it before it spreads in their shelter, and they can contact you as a transfer shelter to get it out of their shelter and to help them. And so we all need to work on this together, and we need to bring it, and so a lot of this is going to be through our education and discussion. And a lot of you might have had some fears of ringworm at the beginning of the presentation, and hopefully a lot of it was subsided just by getting some of this education out there and to really get the facts out there, because the facts and the research, you can't deny it. You just have to apply it and be able to learn the concepts, because you can't always do everything that is asked of you. But if you understand the concepts, you know how to apply the methods to be able to get as much as you can out of the system. And know that this is a curable disease. There's nothing that you can't cure out of it. It just takes time and it takes patience, which is sometimes really hard in the sheltering community. Okay, so I did want to make a lot of time for questions. I did want to say a big thank you to all the sort of DVMs out there who have helped create a lot of education for me to learn so that I can actually take their concepts of the really smart people who have lots of letters after their names, and I can take their concepts and bring it to the shelters, disseminate their knowledge, and get this shelter workers starting to work and do the programs, because the shelter workers, they want to do this. They just don't know how. And so it's just getting out to them and telling them this is how you can break down, this is how it works, this is how you can combat it. It's really just starting this conversation and getting this going. So thank you guys all for listening to this, and thank you so much for the East Coast for staying up so late and hearing this as well. And so we're going to, I think, start with questions.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. It's so wonderful hearing how this program's growing, how many lives you're saving. And, of course, I love the most that you're leveraging volunteer manpower to do it. Yes. That is so exciting. And I couldn't help but notice I saw Monisa's smiling face in one of those photos, yep. And I ran into her here in the halls at UC Davis Vet Med the other day, so you're absolutely right. It
yep,
makes them consider different careers.
I helped her get in there. She did a lot of it on her own, but, she got a lot of clinical experience because she came from Brazil and couldn't work anywhere. But absolutely. Work.
It's such an important point that if you ask it, they will do it. That's what they want to do, and they kind of love roles like this that are a little bit elevated. So all that's so exciting. But I have to tell you, I can't move past what you said. It's such an important point. There's no way an animal's going to die of ringworm unless they end up in a shelter. I mean, that is just so poignant.
It's
so thank you for making that point.
It cures on its own. But, yeah, so we need to detect it quicker in the shelter so that we can find placement for them.
That's right. We can do this. Keep calm and sulfur dip on. Okay, before we jump into these questions, I just have to say, shout out to the husband who removed the tub. Husband of the year over there.
Fantastic. I know. She was so excited about it. She had no idea, too. And she was like,
oh, my gosh,
she
said ringworm's not
under
sexy.
The tub. I know.
Okay, here we go. We have lots of questions as suspected, so let's dive in. I keep my DTMs at 80 degrees Fahrenheit and 40% humidity in an incubator, but I've never gotten a mitochondria. Do you have any tips on getting them to sporulate?
What you might want to look is make sure that there's airflow in there. A lot of incubators, for some reason, they are set up as closed systems, and when we had this at our hospital. Our hospital got this really fancy incubator, and they couldn't get anything to grow right. And then I put it in my makeshift incubator, which is made for like hatching eggs or something that I modified for, and it grew fine. And really what I realized is that their incubator needed to be braced open a little bit because 80 to 85 degrees, perfect temperature, what you're having it at. The humidity, fantastic, because you want to keep those cultures nice and moist. So you have the correct growing measurements, but what I think is that there's not enough airflow. And so what you need to do is make sure that they're getting airflow in there so that they are able to, the microkinetic needs some air. And sometimes the cultures actually give you plastic bags to put it in there, and that's to increase the moisture. But don't put them in the plastic bags. Let them get air. And I think that will help you. If not, reach out and I can help you troubleshoot something else later.
Thank you. What is your average time of treatment for ringworm until negative culture?
About 6 to 8 weeks. Now, there are some times that it's a little bit longer. If that kitten that comes in that glows more hairs than it doesn't, it's going to take a little bit longer to cure. But that's why we do weekly cultures to kind of monitor their response to treatment. Most times, the 21 days of itraconazole, fantastic. I don't need to do anything more. If I'm getting to week 7 or 8 and I'm still culturing a P2 or P3 and that animal came in with a severe infection, then I'm going to give that animal another week of medication. And I'm going to be doing a lot of, so I want to keep monitoring it. But for the most part, when I look back at all of my data, my average treatment length is about 6 to 8 weeks. And actually it's getting a little bit, it's getting a little bit shorter because some of my transfer in shelters are starting to treat at their source shelter. And so if I can't get their kittens for 2 weeks, they start their kittens under treatment. And so then they enter my program with 2 weeks under treatment. So then they're in my program a little bit shorter. Because I got buy-in from the shelters that I started pulling.
Right.
Because then they started realizing, okay, you will pull.
Okay.
And you will keep doing this.
So I get started. Isn't ringworm self-limiting?
It is in a natural environment, but shelters are not natural environments. We put our animals up on top of each other. We have to go in and out of their cages. But yes, a feral cat I will not do treatment on. A feral cat that comes through our spay neuter TNR program, we will spay it and put it back out in the wild. Obviously, we can't handle the cat to do it any sort of treatment, and it will self-resolve in the colony. And ringworm is not fatal unless you end up in an animal shelter, because animal shelters are not natural environments.
Good question. What's the best way to safely dispose of the Swiffer cloths?
Trash. There isn't you don't have to burn it or anything. You just put it in the trash, and so it's adhered and it's into those cloths. Obviously don't rub the cloth on your face or do anything like that, but put it in the closed trash. If you want to put it in the trash right before you take the trash out, that would probably be most ideal. But again, if we create too much sort of fear around this, we're creating the fear around ringworm as well. So, you would just dispose of it, not any really specially, but you want to just kind of put it in the trash, because all your animals are also under treatment, and so they're not releasing as many spores. You're just being really careful by eating that product.
I love the point you made that you have never had a child or another animal in the home be infected with ringworm. Yeah, just throw them in the trash. Do you think a big part of the fear is that foster homes will be banned from having foster kittens after having fostered ringworm kittens? What a great question.
Yeah, and that's one of my, I teach a lot of these sort of apprenticeships where people come in and they're always talking about what their programs are. And I always find it really funny how if a foster parent has ringworm, then they can't foster for 6 months. And I'm like, well, what happens on that 5th month and 29th day? Does the last 4 pop? It doesn't really make much sense. We have so many times where it's discovered in the foster home that they have ringworm. That foster home doesn't really want to do the ringworm treatment. They want to foster other kittens. We have a cleaning protocol that they can do that one day and pick up another set of litter, another set of foster kittens the next day. Now, we ask our foster parents to really keep them in a cleanable environment, because you never know for things like this. So most of our foster homes have kept them in a bathroom or somewhere that can be cleaned. And then we just have cleaning protocols. We have a 3-step cleaning process. You sort of degrease the room, do a sort of hard, dirty clean, rinse it, then do a disinfectant clean, rinse it, and then basically it's done. And you just need a contact time, and you need to sort of gather up all those hairs and dust and make sure that it's sort of cleaned in the room. But there's no waiting time. And also, if those foster parents are doing finishing school foster, they've already given me negative cultures from their kittens that are in their foster space.
Right.
So that foster space is not inundated with ringworm, or else I would be getting environmental contaminants on the ringworm culture as well. So I know that and I also pick my ringworm foster parents because I pick them as they are really good and sort of anal people. If you kind of want that, you don't want people who are too relaxed. So I do sort of make sure from the foster that these will be some sort of, they'll follow my instructions. They know how sort of important it is, but not fearful. Yeah. But, and they have their sort of foster set of clothes. They have their foster sweats. That lady in the slide, she had these black sweats, and those are her foster sweats, and she keeps them in the room. She puts them on when she goes in so the kids can climb all over her. She washes up and leaves. But for the most part, her kittens are in there are pretty much negative. They're just sitting there and waiting for our negative test to be negative, because it's a point of time test that we have to wait 7 days to interpret. And so there's a time where you just have to wait, but you're negative. So might as well be playing in the bathroom and not hanging out in a cage.
Such important points. I think you are just debunking myths left and right. I love this. Could you speak more on eliminating fear in foster volunteers? Yes, we often need to rehome kittens, cats with ringworm because their foster parents don't want to take care of them.
So, yeah, I think a lot of that is, just bringing them in, getting them education. What are they, and finding out, what are you afraid of? I'd be more afraid of contracting ringworm from visiting a kitten in our adoption center that we don't know has ringworm yet than anybody who goes to a ringworm treatment area. Those animals are under treatment. You're not going to get ringworm because they aren't actually releasing a lot of spores because of our lime sulfur dip. You're more at risk to get that kitten that we haven't found yet to have ringworm in the adoption center where we don't use our stuff. So really it's just getting those foster parents together, getting a class. Having a class like this, I have a bunch of foster, nope, never going to do it. And then I teach a class and they're like, oh, you know what? It's needed, right? Because if they know that these animals are going to be euthanized unless you step forward to really help this, they will know that there's a need, and then like, oh, it's just fungus. And that's what they just need to understand, is that they have this fear of what they think it might be, or that it might be everywhere, and that it's airborne and it goes everywhere and you can't eradicate it and you just got to burn your house down. But really, there's there's ways of cleaning it. Dr. Moriello sent me carpet squares and fabric swatches, and we would have to rub them on the lesions for 1 minute, which is a really long time when you're looking at your clock and you're rubbing it on a cat's lesion. And then we'd send them back to her research lab, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she figured out how do you get it out of carpets, how do you get it out of fabric. And it's a lot easier than we once thought. And so she wrote up chapters on decontamination. So there's ways that you can get rid of this. It's just that nobody really looked to try and to look to do. Dr. Moriello is in the lab. She's figuring it out, and I'm taking her knowledge and trying to get shelters to understand and get what she's saying in there.
Or do you find it's enough just to hear that from you, or is it helpful to have them talk to volunteers that are already fostering?
That's a good point. When I do run a foster class, I always bring in usually that girl that I did the pictures of, Teresa Murphy. So I usually bring in 1 or 2 of my foster parents because, I can tell them these are all the things you need to do, but I love the foster parents to come in and say, this is how I do it. So every Thursday we put the hows of how you do things, because honestly, I haven't fostered ringworm kittens in my house because I don't have a good setup for my house for adult cats, and I have too many resident cats or that sort of thing. So I know how to do it in a shelter. I know how to do it at different shelters, but it's great to bring in somebody who actually does it to speak to them and to say what she likes about fostering these guys is that there's a need and you know that you're being really utilized. And usually they're older kittens and she works a lot of the days, and she's a nurse, so she works long hours. And by fostering tiny kittens, she was always worried that she needed to come home, or that they weren't as stable. But lots of times our ringworm kittens, one, they've been in the shelter system for 5 to 6 weeks, so we've gotten all of their diarrhea out of the way, their URI out of the way, and everything like that, and really gotten to be sort of stable kittens, and they're bigger, and so you don't have to worry as much about them. And so a lot of foster parents really like that they aren't as worried as these tiny baby kittens that are a little more fragile. These guys aren't fragile. They don't know anything is wrong with them.
Such good points. I'm so sad that we're down to 3 minutes because we have tons of questions left, so we're going to power through. And I just want to remind everybody, keep submitting. We are going to move over to the Maddie's Pet Forum, and Laura has graciously offered to answer questions there. If not tonight, tomorrow, we can continue on with ringworm discussion, so don't worry. Okay, in practice, I stopped using cultures when the PCR became available. Am I correct in assuming that this is not done in your program because it is cost prohibitive?
Yay, I like this question because I didn't really bring it up. Because anyway, so PCRs are a tool, right? So all the things I talk about are tools. And PCRs are a fantastic tool, but you have to know how to utilize them. They are a fantastic tool to rule out, do I have ringworm or not? But they are a terrible management tool of, am I done with ringworm? Or am I still infected? Because what the ringworm PCR is a very nice, very sensitive test that tests for the DNA on the hair coat. And so it's fantastic at first to be like, I don't know. And it's going to tell you, yes, it is ringworm. But after you finish treatment, a lot of times I'm culturing animals that are culture negative, but they will still be PCR positive because they have fragments of DNA that are still on their hair coat, and the DNA will still be picked up and they will still say positive. So I've had some shelters that I've worked with that use PCRs, but they say, our animals are positive for 3 to 4 months. And I'm like, there's no way your animals are positive for 3 to 4 months. Yeah. But it's that your PCRs are positive. Because maybe your animals are still in an environment they haven't cleaned. Maybe there's one of those things that's not working, but my guess is the animal is negative. But it's such a sensitive test, so it's a good ruling out test. We use it a lot for dogs, that have suspicious hair loss, that's Woods negative, and we want to use it if we want to move that animal on fast. Now we do, because mainly the dogs would just have to sit here for 6 or 7 days to wait until that culture was negative and then move on. So we utilize the PCRs as a tool to rule out, but we definitely do not use it as a management tool because it's a little too sensitive. And it's not necessarily the cost prohibitive, it's that it's not getting us the information that I want.
That you need. Such an important point. Our next question is from Dr. Julie Levy. Like you, we've traditionally collected 2 negative cultures before declaring a cat cured. However, we never have the second culture turn positive. Do you ever have the second culture turn positive? And if not, are we being overcautious?
Yes, we are. And this is my next sort of push is to get away from the 2 negative cultures. Because I think we are
doing, if we're doing things properly, I almost never have anything significantly turn positive on that second culture that indicates that animal needs to go back for treatment. Sometimes in the beginning stages when I'm trying to figure out if a kitten is going to break or not, I may push it through on week 2 or 3, and that may be like, okay, now he's starting to break and he moves back. But any animal who's gone under 5 or 6 weeks of treatment and has had first negative culture, I've never had a significantly negative or significant growth on the second culture that has deemed that animal to go back into positive. So what I want to start doing is, yes, I'm actually working with the University of Nevada in Reno, and we're sort of developing this, an indication of sort of like a snap test for ringworm.
Right.
And it's getting really good results for just like PCRs, like do I have it or not? And we're starting to actually do the testing of the animals that I put into first negative and seeing what that testing is, because I really want to eliminate that first negative week. But
so it's only getting easier.
It's only getting easier, but you have to do with what your shelter administration wants to do. So they want those animals to be really clear. They want those animals to have 2 negative cultures. It used to be 3 negative cultures, so at least we got down to 2. And I think we can get down to 1. We just need to get a lot of the sort of data behind us to say that yes. So Julie, if you have data that indicates, we just need to gather a lot of this data so that we can tell people, yes, there is nothing significant that happens on that second negative culture. Why are we increasing their length of stay? Just so that we can cross our T's and dot our I's. We have to have a little bit more trust in this. Yeah. And also, like in the future, maybe we would have also a treatment program. We just did 6 weeks of treatment, no cultures, and they could just go. Because most of our animals are cured within 6 weeks. So could we do 3 weeks in shelter, 3 weeks in a foster home, come back and be available for adoption without any cultures? I don't know, maybe. With the use of the woods lamp and things like that, I think we could create guides that could be a little bit more user-friendly for shelters that could not do the cultures or do not have the staff to do that, is that we can develop maybe some programs from a lot of data that I have collected by utilizing woods lamps, creating a better guide for that, and possibly moving cats through in a 6-week pattern where really a majority of our cats are going to be successfully cured by then, and we don't have to rely on a lot of cultures and interpretation and vet staff and med staff. Could we have just a 3-week in-house, 3-week foster come back and be adopted? I think 90 to 95% of our animals would be cured at that rate. And that could be.
This is such exciting stuff. I can't believe I'm so stressed to get off the phone about ringworm. We have 6 questions left, and I want to keep talking about ringworm. I'm just looking at Run right here. How does a woods lamp differ from a black light? So you guys, move on over to Maddie's Pet Forum. There's links right there in your widget. They'll also take you to this entire presentation. Laura's always available. She's so kind. In case you can't tell how excited she is, she wants to spread the good word. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. This is just excellent, and I look forward to carrying this over to the forum. Laura Mullen, you're the best.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Links are in your resource widget. See you in the forum.